Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. We believe life is about how we react. Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. A long time ago, in episode 118, we interviewed a guy named Bob McDonald. He's the technical program manager at Google for Project Euphonia. It sounds like there's been a lot of progress on this project involving speech for people with disabilities. Let's talk a little more about this. Sean, what do we know?
Well, like you said, a ton of progress. And even when we spoke with Bob last year, or even maybe it was more than that, like 2 years ago, whatever it was, even then, Google had a ton of time already invested in the project.
Right.
Now today, this is referred to as Project Relate. They have done a soft launch and it is available to Android users. It's an app that allows users to train their own personalized speech recognition model and use it in several different ways in a manner that's going to help improve their life, whether it be speech to text or just helping somebody else understand the words that are coming out of your mouth, or perhaps Google Assistant queries. You get the idea. So Project Relate is now available for Android users, and I want to read, Kyle, just a snippet that Google posted along with their YouTube video that we'll link in our show notes. For millions of people with speech impairments as a result of neurological conditions like ALS, cerebral palsy, traumatic brain injury, or even Friedreich's ataxia, being understood can be difficult, to which you can relate, right? Like
Absolutely,
okay.
Yeah.
All right, back to their words.
You know, I think our listeners can relate too, right?
Especially if they're listening to us, yes. All right, back to Google's words. To break these communication barriers, Google's speech and research teams joined forces to create Project Relate. This new Android app aims to help people with speech impairments communicate more easily with others and interact with Google Assistant. So, the videos of this and what they've captured and what they show and how impactful this app is and can be blows my mind. Yeah. So, Kyle, I'm excited. I guess, to be fair, Google nor anybody else connected has paid us to be a part of this or to record this or anything. We just believe in the project so much, and we're excited to see what it's doing for many other users that we wanted to revisit that conversation we had in episode 118 and give our listeners an update to the tools and share where we're at today, or not us, where Google is at today.
Absolutely. When speech is a literal barrier between you and like communicating with either other people or even with your smartphone to get the information you need or to send the text you need, and this technology overcomes that, like how amazing, right? For so many people.
For the benefit of listeners who maybe can't relate because their speech is perfect and everybody around them is easy to understand, think about those times where you've used Siri or Google Assist or whoever, whatever it may be, you've tried to use a speech activating kind of technology, and the response is something that you did not say. I feel like we've all been there, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like we can all relate to the frustration and the moment of disbelief. Like, what? How did you come up with that out of the words I just spoke?
Right.
Why are you giving me directions to Bemidji, Minnesota, or whatever it may be? So think about it in those terms, folks. When you've had those moments of frustration or surprising disbelief where you get irritated and you just give up and type it in yourself or speak differently, the difference for you versus somebody with ALS or CP or any other condition, we can't just give up and try a different route. There is no backup plan for a lot of people. So technology like this is going to be powerful and is already making a huge difference for a lot of people.
It levels the playing field, right?
Yeah.
Like it provides access for people, just like a physical ramp or something that helps people physically get into a store or whatever it is. This is that thing that helps communication, that ramp.
So not only do we want to let everybody know, especially for Android users, Project Relate is available now. It's free. So if it's something you're interested in, go find it in the store. Of course, we'll link all kinds of good stuff in our show notes for Project Relate. But also wanted to remind you, you can still help. Back in episode 118, we were trying to recruit and looking for different people to help give speech samples. Well, Project Relate is utilizing what they call trusted testers, and they are still looking for different people to help kind of be on the backside of improving this technology. If you're interested in becoming a tester, we'll also have a link specifically for that available to you as well. So thank you, Bob, for including us and giving us an update, and Taylor and Julie and the entire team at Google and Project Relate for making a difference for so many people. Kyle, let's get into this episode's What Say You?
This comment comes from Mike Andreessen. He put it on our website, and it relates to an episode where we talked about focus in life and getting distracted and doing multiple things at once, and how that's probably not a good idea. And Mike backed that up. He says, it seems like it's best to focus on one thing at a time if quality outcomes are the goal. Our brains really can't think about two demanding tasks at the same time. And he linked an article, and I just pulled out a quote from the article. The more we multitask, the less we actually accomplish, because we slowly lose our ability to focus enough to learn. If we're constantly attempting to multitask, we don't practice tuning out the rest of the world to engage in deeper processing and learning. And that's from Dr. Kubu. You can read a little more about it. We'll link that, our show notes. But just reinforcing that multitasking is not the answer. And also, I appreciate the fact that Mike is listening to our podcast,
Yep.
So.
And I'm willing to bet he's one of those guys that has a hard time understanding you, Kyle. And he gets it. So the fact that he's patient and, maybe replays episodes and really it's been a big part of your journey and mine with FA. Not only does he listen, but he was a crew member in our Race Across America. And him and his family shows up for Red Taxi events all over the place, it seems.
Yeah.
And I think also for our listeners' sake, isn't Mike a doctor of sorts?
Yeah, I believe he is a PhD. Yeah, he worked in research for many, many years. I think he recently retired and is enjoying his family.
I was thinking something related to neurology or the head or the brain.
Yep.
Does that sound about right?
Yeah,
Mike, sorry, we don't know your life, so we apologize. But I think it's valuable to point that out because to me that carries a whole lot of weight. He's probably studied the brain way more than I ever have and probably ever will. So
Yep. That makes this comment even more relevant.
well, hopefully, as long as we didn't totally butcher it. Speaking of butchering things, that's what we're about to do next. A couple episodes ago, we had an interview with Tom Hamilton. In fact, that was just episode 181. And in those conversations, we were getting an update with his daughter Annie and different perspectives on his parenting and business connected to advancing research and all the different things. We had talked specifically, or the comment came up, that when it comes to life with FA, or really any progressive condition, you've never arrived at coming to grips with the scenario or the challenges you're up against. One day, you're diagnosed, and you work through that. And then maybe down the road, months, weeks, years, whatever it may be, that diagnosis turns into something else you've got to wrestle with. Now you can't walk. And then down the road, now you can't talk. Down the road, now you can't. You get the idea.
Right.
And in thinking about this, it just caused me to, to think a little bit more beyond that conversation with Tom and spend a little bit of mental energy on recognizing that there's so much to a progressive disease that is going to be an ongoing challenge, I guess.
I think about one of the monologues that you have in the film, the ataxia, and you're talking about your diagnosis and how the doctor is recommending that you plan on buying a house that's a single story and put up grab bars all over your house and a number of other things that he recommended. You know, obviously at the time of diagnosis, it's like my mind is not going there right now.
Yeah.
But at some point, that is a practical matter, right? Like you said, when we literally can't walk anymore and we're using a wheelchair, it is reasonable to think about grab bars everywhere and a single-story house, or perhaps an elevator. We had a conversation a few episodes ago about when I was looking for a house, what were my considerations in accessibility? And is that something we need to consider for the next 5 or 10 years? Just thinking about our personal futures and what all of that means. At some level, we have to try and live as normal a life as we can, but also take into consideration our disease and what it's going to mean in the future. And I think there's a balance somewhere there.
Yeah, bringing up that original conversation, I am now 16 years removed from that diagnosis. And although I can see the wisdom in the kind of advice they were giving me, back then it was a completely different place of mind, right? I wasn't thinking all this stuff, but it certainly applies today. When I'm traveling, I'm booking rooms with grab bars in the restrooms. When I, bought the car that I have, it's a matter of, can I haul a wheelchair and a walker and my trike and different things like that. So certainly being mindful of all that. But man, I don't know that I needed that kind of advice 16 years ago. So I definitely find value in it. So I'm not saying it was ill-placed. I don't know what to think of it.
They didn't understand, I don't think, how to put it in context.
Sure.
They're not able to communicate to you like, all right, maybe this doesn't apply directly at the moment, but it might in 16 years from now, And so It's a challenge probably for everybody involved, including the doctors and everyone, to relate the context of a progressive disability.
I had dinner with a friend last week who asked me if I'm noticing any changes due to FA. And the answer is yes, especially lately. And I really do. I'm thinking maybe especially since my femur break. That may have jump-started a few things. Maybe it didn't. I don't know. There's no way to know for sure. But just in the last even several months, I've noticed that I'm furniture walking a lot more than I used to. I'm leaning on the walls, counters, couch, whatever is around. Carrying things even around the house is a little more challenging. Little things like that. So I feel like it's been a lot more realistic lately for me to recognize that having a couple steps into the front door, I don't know how much longer that's going to be manageable, I guess.
Right.
So I guess with all that in mind, obviously, most people know, especially whether it's FA or some other progressive condition, it's always a moving target. My friend asked me after that question, how are you dealing with it mentally? And my response was, I don't know. Mostly because I don't dwell on it. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Obviously, Kyle, you and I are the same. We don't let those challenges define who we are or what we can do. And we just quickly look for ways to work around those barriers or speed bumps. So I guess I'm wondering, Kyle, you're a little more, I don't want to say advanced, because that would imply...
No, definitely. Let's go with advanced. Smarter, you're a lot more better looking.
You're more advanced than I am in your progressive stage. How have you dealt with or wrestled with the changes that you've experienced, even just in the last 15 years that you and I have known each other?
The progression of the way I deal with things tracks with the disease a little bit, because I think that the progressive nature forces you to. There's nothing we can do at the moment ultimately about the progression of FA, right? We can exercise and we can keep ourselves in as tip-top shape as possible, but ultimately there's no stopping FA yet.
Yeah.
And I think I've learned to incorporate those thoughts into my everyday over time. Like at the beginning when I was first diagnosed, absolutely, I didn't even talk about it with my parents at all for 2 years. Yeah. The other day, I texted my dad a new wheelchair that I saw that's super portable and it has electric power. And that's just a normal part of conversation now that I wouldn't have had at the very beginning. And so I think that my dealing with it and involving it in my life tracks a little bit with the progression of it, because it's kind of forced to.
I feel like I only talk about FA when somebody asks me specifically, or when we're on this podcast. I don't know if it's good or bad, so maybe that's why I hesitate, because maybe I'm realizing there's a different approach I can take or should take. I don't know if that's true or not.
Well, and I think there's a huge difference in our careers, the way that FA comes up there, because for me, I live it.
Part of life.
It's part of everything I do. And for you, your job it's separate from FA in a lot of aspects, right? the main reason that I have changed my thinking, I think, is I was forced to. Because of the situations that either I put myself in or that like threw my way.
Yeah, it's certainly talking about jobs. There's been thoughts more recently, me questioning my ability to keep doing what I'm doing. I don't think I can't, but there's certainly areas where it's just not the same. You know, obviously, as we're talking about the progressive nature, somebody asked me last week, a coworker who asked if I missed being in the store. You know, I used to run around stores all day and do all kinds of different physical
restock
parts
shelves
of it.
and talk to customers,
walk
and
up
check
and down the
people
stairs,
out.
all this different little. And he asked me if I missed it. I was like, A, the answer is no. B, I don't, not because it wasn't fun, but there's no way I could do what I used to do. You know what, this might blow the mind of some of our FA-specific listeners or knowledgeable listeners. When I first started with the company I'm with now, I was their graveyard janitor. And part of my nightly duty was to take apart all the machines in the meat department. So we're talking huge meat grinders and things with large blades and pieces, you know, all these things. I had to take them apart, completely rinse down the machine, every element of it, every component, sanitize it, wash it, rinse it, put it all back together. So I'm in a room or an area where the floor, everything is soaked. The floor is covered in water. There's not one dry spot in this area. I've got rubber boots on and like a plastic poncho of sorts. And I'm walking around carrying these big old parts to meat grinders and plates and different components that are, you know, it requires two hands. And there's no way I could do that today.
Yeah.
And I think about things like that, you know.
Right.
Riding the upright, there's no way I would even try to do that
Upright
today.
bike, yeah.
Yeah, when I promoted and grew and was a manager, you know, we had to carry the cash register tills up and down stairs at the end of the night. And I can't do stairs without utilizing a handrail today.
When I lived in Sacramento right out of college, I worked for a company called Brown & Caldwell, and they do a lot of water and wastewater work, and I did a lot of water sampling at wastewater plants or out in the middle of a big field on a groundwater. They call them lysimeters, but they sample the water that's like near the surface of the ground. Anyway, so I'm like, you know, driving out in my four-wheel drive truck, walking around in my steel-toed boots and on all these uneven surfaces. And so we're talking about the difference between that and today. First of all, I use a wheelchair full-time. And even at that time...
Drive a minivan, not a four-wheel truck. I mean, let's not leave that out.
And even at that time, I was certainly falling sometimes in certain situations, you know, on the ground, whatever, outside in the dirt. And a lot of it was by myself, so whatever it took, it didn't need to look pretty, just whatever it took to get the job done, right? But I was a field engineer with a physical disability, and really, there were some situations where I probably shouldn't have been doing that. But, you know, that comes to mind with the next career position, right? I jumped at the opportunity to work for FARA because that position is about FA. And it would kind of solve that problem of awkwardly going into a job interview and trying to pretend like FA doesn't exist.
Sure. I don't remember the episode, but we talked about it once before. We wish there was a roadmap, or we had talked about wishing there was a roadmap that said, okay, after 3 years, it's time to get a wheelchair. After 7 years, it's time to buy this or that, or consider this or that. And it's, unfortunately, there isn't that kind of definitive progression. So a question for you, Kyle. When or how did you decide to start using a wheelchair more often or more frequently?
The thing that pushed me was meeting somebody who seemed like they had a really exciting life and was a really funny, awesome guy. His name is Matt Fritsch, and he's been on the podcast before. We've hung out with him before. He's been a friend for a long time. But when I met him, and he was in a wheelchair, and he had a severe disability, and he was still funny, he had a great career, and he had a lot of friends, great family, and he was just a guy. That's when I started realizing, oh, maybe I can still be who I want to be from a wheelchair or with a disability in the future.
There's going to be a day, right, where I have to more seriously consider utilizing a wheelchair on a regular basis. And thankfully, because of the incident a couple years ago, I have a brand new wheelchair waiting for me. All I got to do is open the storage shed.
Yeah. I think that's a good point, though, because when that time comes for anyone, you don't want to be like, all right, I guess I have to sit in my house for 3 months while I get a wheelchair or whatever. But since it's sitting there in the shed or in the corner, wherever, it's there when that time does come. So it's an immediate thing. It's like, oh, I need to go to the store. All right, I can grab my chair and go.
Sure.
That is my encouragement to people a lot of times is if people are thinking about it, to go ahead and get measured and put the wheelchair in the corner, because you may use it for a trip to the mall or the state fair or something where you're going to have to walk a lot. It's going to really improve your experience, I think. And then it's there when you need it, when you need to make that transition full time as well. And for me, when I realized that the wheelchair improved my experience and not detracted from it, that's what flipped the switch for me as well. When I realized it was a tool to improve my life.
I'm guessing one thing that was helpful for me when I got fitted and ordered the wheelchair last year, I didn't quote unquote need it like full time, or it wasn't an absolute necessity. Right. I feel like maybe that made moving in that direction a little bit easier, because I imagine there's some hesitancy, right, of making that emotional commitment or realization that, oh, shoot, I'm at a place now where I gotta have a wheelchair. And for me, thankfully, I wasn't up against that decision. It was more of a, okay, it's probably a good idea, and we all see the writing on the wall. Who knows if it's next year or next decade. There's going to be a day where I need one, so let's go ahead and just prepare and have it sitting at the corner. So in a sense, there wasn't that deciding factor that said, okay, I have to commit this to life. So maybe along the lines of your encouragement, if it's something that might be coming up, or even if something that is likely to be a thing, doing it before you need it, maybe that's something that can help folks wrestle with that transition when the time is right.
Yeah, because I feel like there's a lot that's out of our control and a lot that we don't choose as far as the progression of our disease. But if we can choose to, okay, I'm going to choose to go get a wheelchair even though I don't need it. And then I'm taking away the forcefulness of needing that, and absolutely, like, you can't go one more day without it.
In a sense, you're getting out in front of it. And, politicians talk about that all the time, or bad press, it's like, oh, we got a bad story about to break. We got to get out in front of this. And obviously I watch too much news or TV or movies, but, I mean, that's what came to mind when you think, go out and get the wheelchair. It's like, get out in front of the challenge and own it. Make the challenge your bitch.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah. Yeah, I like it.
One thing I want to add to this rambling of an episode, especially since it's closing out season 7, so many of our listeners and friends are in the same position we are. It's constantly changing, especially related to disease or disability. So, I hope everybody recognizes we're all up against something, and we're just doing our best, figuring it out as we go. Yeah. And B, the underlying message is there is still so much more to life than our physical limitations or our condition. And sometimes it just might take a little more work to find the things that, like you said, are still in our control and that allow us to come to life.
Having someone to relate to who goes through the same challenges but has an incredible life and is excited about the future was really important for me. And we want to try to do that as much as possible and encourage each other as we move forward in life, close out season 7, and start the summer. We want to get as much as we can out of life and encourage others too as well.
I agree with you, Kyle. And with that, I hope our listeners are encouraged today, one way or another.
All right, Sean. Time to move on to thank you notes. We both believe showing a little gratitude improves our lives so much. So who do you have to thank today?
At the time of recording, we've got a couple weeks, but this episode comes out just days before Team Determinants takes on the 178-mile relay race known as Reno Tahoe Odyssey. And every time we do it, it seems to be a little bit of a struggle getting a full team and getting everything organized, but we got it, and we're about to do it just in a few days. So I'm saying thank you to the RTO runners on behalf of Team Determinants.
I want to thank my Uber driver in Austin. Andra and I were in an Uber, and we were talking to the driver, and he was telling us he came from Cuba, and he was telling us about all the history of Cuba, and we were having a great conversation. He handed me $2 bills because I asked him what the Cuban currency was, and he it's the Cuban peso, and he handed me $2 bills, and he said, "Here, keep these." I was like, "Oh, cool. How much are they worth?" And he said, "Take a penny and cut it in 10 pieces, and that's how much one of these is worth."
No way.
And it was a really vivid picture of the whole conversation, what we were talking about, and the difference in societies and the way things are done, and the way history has treated all these things that happened in our different cultures. And so it was a really rich conversation, and I appreciate it. So thank you to our Cuban Uber driver.
Just for context, our listeners probably know I'm in California, you're in Pennsylvania, so we rarely get to flesh out all these things. And in front of me, I just have a note about Kyle's thank you, and it just says Cuban Uber driver. And knowing you were in Austin or Texas, even though it's not Dallas, there was a part of me that was hopeful. It had something to do with Mark Cuban.
Oh. Yeah, no. Or maybe a Cuban sandwich or something.
Yeah, or like a cigar, maybe? I don't know. But
not quite.
Maybe that gives our listeners, too, a glimpse into how our conversations tend to go on Sunday morning. So before I get distracted too much, let's wrap this up. Again, we want to remind you to check out our show notes. Lots of good stuff going on over at Google with Project Relate. We're going to miss being here for a couple of months, but we are looking forward. Kyle's got the big bike ride. I've got the big sleep that I'm going to enjoy on Sundays. Who knows? And of course, planning for Season 8 is already underway. We look forward to coming back strong until Season 8. Keep living with urgency.
Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. This show is possible with your support. Visit twodisableddudes.com to donate.
Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app.